Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the CMAQ CRP and TAPL Project Selection Committee to order. Thanks for being flexible and rescheduling this meeting from February. With that, I'd like to go around and just do a quick introduction. I'll start. Doug Ferguson, CMAP. Tara?
Tara Orban, representing counties.
Mark Pitstick, RTA, representing transit agencies.
Todd Schmidt, representing FHWA.
Chris Schmidt, representing Illinois Department of Transportation.
And Grant Davis with CDOT.
All right, thank you. There are no agenda changes or announcements. Are there any announcements from any committee members before we get going? Didn't think so, but I thought I'd double check. Approval of the minutes. So included in your meeting materials are the draft minutes from our December 5th meeting of last year. I would entertain a motion for approval.
Pitstick motions to approve.
Thank you,
Schmidt,
Mark.
second.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions, comments, changes to the minutes as presented? All right, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes pass. Moving on to program monitoring, the programming or project programming status sheets were included in your materials for all three programs, including the CMAQ deferred programming sheet. I know, Mark, you've brought up the deferred projects. We have it on our list of things to do. We just haven't gotten around to spending some time doing some cleanup on some of those projects, making sure that those projects are still like not all of them ended up on the deferred list because they weren't moving forward, but like maybe doing some cleanup of projects that are definitely dead in the water and are not going to be proceeding forward. But if there are any questions on those status sheets. All right. 4.02, the CMAQ Programming Summary and Obligation Goal Report was included in your materials. You'll notice that we do have about 46.7 million in obligations so far this federal fiscal year, which isn't bad. A couple large transit projects helped us in that area. To spend down our unobligated balance, we do need to exceed 200 million. That's probably not realistic, but we're hoping to at least cover the amount that was apportionment for this federal fiscal year. So any questions on the status sheet? Yeah, Mark.
Kind of a broader question about, rescissions and things like that. Is any of that been coming up? Is that a possibility?
We have not heard anything about any rescissions, but I honestly would say nothing's off the table right now. I mean, it is a possibility. I will say, while we consider we as an agency consider us to have an unobligated balance, it's really because of IDOT's actions of transferring the funds into other programs to make sure that the state gets reappropriated. We, from an FHWA side, we don't have a huge unobligated balance. So that's one positive. What's open for rescission is the current apportionment. So.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? All right, moving on to the project changes. These two project changes were on our agenda at the last meeting, and we included them because they were submitted at the deadline for the last meeting. However, they were both under our guidelines open for administrative action, and so that's what we did as staff. But John Hasma's here to just give us an overview of what those changes were. John?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So
as Doug said, with the postponement of the February 13th meeting, we approve those administratively since they were under the administrative thresholds. Those two changes include one project that was CMAQ funded and one that was a TAP L fund project. So we go ahead to the next slide. The first approved request was for the Illinois 62 Algonquin Road from Plum Grove to Illinois Route 53, and this is in Schaumburg. And staff approved the requested cost increase for an additional $332,000 CMAQ for construction in 25. And then if we move to the next slide, we will see this is for the phase 3 of the Plum Creek Greenway Trail sponsored by the Forest Preserve District of Will County, and staff approved this request of a cost increase for $490,000 TAP L for construction and construction engineering in 2025. And while these were administrative changes, we still planned on bringing these to that February 13th meeting because as much as possible, we do like the decisions coming from this body. So staff's tendency is to only use administrative approvals where there is circumstances such as this, where it might impact a project's timeline due to missing a tip amendment cycle, which just was approved at the last Transportation Committee at the February 20th TC meeting. And that's all I have. Happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thanks, John. Any questions on these changes? Yeah, and as John mentioned, this is just an informational item for today, informing you of the changes that were made. So with that, we'll move on to the FFY 2026-2030 program development and our call for projects. As you're well aware, we had our call for projects and we've got some highlights of the applications that were received and then a couple of discussion items for the committee as we look to complete our analysis of the program or the projects and also the development of the program that we'll be bringing back to you at your April meeting. Next slide. You can actually go next. So in total, we received 88 applications. These applications have a combined total cost of $7.68 billion and are requesting a total of a little over $1 billion in federal between the CMAQ, carbon reduction, STP, and TAP funds. More than 20 of the applications requested consideration under multiple fund sources, which is why if you add up these numbers for each program, there's more than the 88 applications. As in past cycles, the CMAQ program is the most popular as it has the largest amount of funding available to program. So I'm going to move through these. Feel free, are there any questions on basic information on what was the application submitted? All right, next slide. We received 60 unique project applications for the CMAQ CRP funds. Overall, the total number of applications is down from the last cycle. So the last cycle we had 81 applications that were submitted. I don't think 60 to 80, I mean, while it's a big jump, is indicating anything unique happening other than maybe just there weren't as many projects ready to go for the program. These applications combined for a total cost of $6.59 billion. And the reason that price is so high is CTA submitted the Red Line Extension project again, which is over $4 billion. So that's why the total project cost is so high. They're requesting a total of $599 million with $440,000 is requested in transportation development credits as match on $2.2 million requested. Of the 60, 12 are located within our highest need cohort communities or community areas. And staff is, well, the numbers will probably change. A couple of them are of questionable eligibility. So there may not be as many to consider when we're finally putting together the program, but we're still working through some of those things. Next slide. So by project type, you'll see that like, once again, well, maybe not. The signal interconnect projects are the most that we received, 19. This tends to be the case, but the signal interconnects only account for a little over 18.5 million in requested funds. Transit facility applications top the requested fund amounts with 3 applications for 170 million, with bicycle and direct emissions reduction applications next in funds requested. We did not receive any applications for bottleneck elimination, the demo category, other, or transit service projects. So with that, I just want to pause before we move on to TAP L. Are there any questions on the applications received for CMAQ and CRP? Yeah, Todd. Microphone, please. Thanks.
For the number of projects and applications, did you see a decrease in local municipalities applying, or was it just everybody equally kind of saw that decrease?
For most, it was across the board down for everybody. There was no like, oh, well, it's only because municipalities didn't apply. And actually, if we, I thought I had it by applicant, but I don't. But it was kind of across the board. I mean, IDOT submitted 22 applications, which when you consider out of 80, that's a decent number. So IDOT was actually up a little bit percentage wise, but we still got quite a few municipal applications. Next slide. So for the TAP L applications, we received 21 unique applications for TAP L, which is slightly down from the 27 that was received the last cycle. Combined, the total amount of the projects submitting applications was 344 million, requesting a total of 167 million. Which includes 502,000 in requested transportation development credits for match on 2.5 million. Of the 21 projects, 2 are located in our highest need cohort 4 communities. And there were, as with a lot of the applications, most of the TAP applications were also submitted for CMAQ or STP or both. So that's, they qualify under most of them. I think it was 17 applied for CMAQ and 7 for STP shared fund. Next slide. So we're working through the evaluation of projects. We expect to have scores by the end of this month with a staff recommendation for your consideration in April to be put out for a public comment period. But before we do that, there's a couple of things that I would like to talk through as far as scoring is concerned and and the staff recommended recommendation. So next slide. The scoring of CMAQ and CRP and TAP applications is we're proposing dropping the disadvantaged community score. So if you remember correctly, our equity score is made out of inclusive growth and the disadvantaged community score. The disadvantaged community score was based upon an analysis done through USDOT's ETC tool, or Equitable Transportation Community tool. That tool is no longer available. It's been removed from USDOT's website. Staff looked at what it would take to come up with a replacement, and at this stage in the game, we think it would be disingenuous to try to cobble something together to replace it with. So what we're proposing to do is just take those 10 points off. All applications were going to be scored on them. So we're just going to do it out of 90 versus 100 points. And before I move on, are there any questions about that? Like, it doesn't really affect the overall like availability of scores. There's still like a good range of points. It was just 10 percentage points. But I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with this before we kind of move on. The committee did approve the scoring, and this is something that we're not happy about, but kind of adjusting to as we go through these times. Yes.
This is fascinating. Are there any other data sets that are not available anymore?
Yeah,
That
and I
are
will.
used, but for the purposes of this call for projects, this is the only one.
There's one other one in the next change that I'm going
Okay.
to talk about, but I just wanted to make sure on the equitable transportation, there's a lot of data sets that have become unavailable. There's hints that some universities downloaded some of them in
I have
advance.
seen that as well, some
Right,
harvesting
but
of.
It's,
Yeah.
it's a little bit harder when it's like sitting in somebody else's, it's not publicly available necessarily, and it may not be in a format that's easily usable. Before, the ETC tool was a mapping-based tool, so it was fairly simple for not only applicants to use, but for staff to process as well, so.
Okay, so thinking this through then, communities that would have scored those 10 points will no longer, it's just not a factor in the scoring for this
Right.
cycle anymore.
Right.
Thank you.
And we're still going to be using our inclusive growth scoring, which does estimate the users of a system, persons of color under the poverty line. So we still have some equity scoring as part of it. It's just we're not going to be using this one anymore. And then moving on to the direct emission reduction change. Go back. Yep. And I'm going to ask for people to remember direct emission reduction, transportation improvement scores. There are two pieces that go into those scores. The first being benefits to sensitive populations, and then improvement to public fleets. So the benefits to sensitive populations was 25 points, and improvement to public fleets was 5 points. The sensitive population score was developed using US EPA analysis of particulate matter in close proximity to sensitive populations. That is not something that we can do anymore either. And some of that information is still available, but not all of it. So we would have to figure out another workaround. And just at this late point in time, we just feel that it's better to move along and score these applications only using the cost benefit analysis for emissions reduction. So we're proposing to do the same as the other applications where the points are awarded are only based upon the emissions and the cost per kilogram to eliminate those. So those would receive 80 points based upon the cost benefit, with 10 points coming from the inclusive growth score. Yeah, Grant.
Would you anticipate this benefiting these projects? Like, is this, like, I know that's kind of tough to do, but like, is this like giving them almost an advantage, or is it going to be neutral, do you think, or disadvantage?
It's hard to say. I mean, because some of the we received 6 direct emission reduction projects. 3 of them were submitted by the PACE and Metro, and then 3 were submitted by local municipalities. And we'll kind of get into the discussion about the local municipalities portion of direct emissions, but I don't think it's going to majorly affect the scores for the transit agencies, only because their coverage is big enough and wide enough.
I guess the only comment that I would have is like, when these scores and the rankings and everything come out, like, we should, like, if there's something that's unusual with it, like, in the past, you've only recommended one of them and now you're recommending all of them,
Yeah.
something to that effect. It should be highlighted so we can have some discussion about
Yeah,
that.
and typically with the direct emission reduction, it's normally all of them. Yeah, we can definitely flag those for you guys, and staff will pay extra close attention to those as far as like how they score compared to the other applications.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the change to direct emission?
I
And
think,
does this seem okay with everybody? I mean, I don't want any committee member, like, staff's not trying to like, just like do a wholesale change on these things. We're trying to adapt to the changing environment out there.
is it proposed to take a vote on these changes?
I don't think a vote's needed. I mean,
Unless there's maybe.
as Grant mentioned, when we have our scoring and our proposed recommendation, if the committee thinks that there was some error or something wasn't captured in our scoring analysis, the committee has the ability to make changes based upon that.
So the 10 points that would have been taken from the disadvantaged community, just because I don't have that information in front of me, where were those 10 points housed prior to that move? Or has this always been, it was just a different tool used?
You mean like, okay, so we added the disadvantaged communities in the last cycle. Those points were taken from the cost benefit of emissions reduction.
And so for this round, it's proposed to just knock off 10 points, but would the 10 points in the next cycle potentially move back into that category, as you're thinking, or? Wait and see.
We haven't given it that much thought,
I get
but
it, I get it.
I mean, in the 2 years from when we
Right.
approve, yeah, staff will be taking a look as we do every single time, like, is this the way we want to move forward? And in theory, we would bring those 10 points back into, I think 100 makes a lot of sense from a standpoint of creating a scoring range for all the applications so that we can makes it easier to select projects. If it's only like 5 points, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, I guess just so that it's clear that I think I can't speak for the rest of the committee, that we're approving these somewhat under protest, in the idea that we're not excited about it, but with time being the way that it is and the limited amount of resources, like you're saying, that data set could exist at a university that was able to pull it down or create something that is of a similar tool, but stress testing that. And
I don't know if
Like-
the ETC tool will ever come back,
Right.
but there may be alternatives out there that we just don't have time to
time to
dive
do it.
into and make sure that it's something. I mean, we spent a lot of time looking at USDOT's ETC tool and making sure that it was something that was usable, and it was capturing what we were trying to capture.
I think as long as that's understood, that we're not, that it's simply because of the timing, that, I would encourage staff to look for that for the next cycle, as I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
probably do.
So we'll be bringing something back for the next
Sure,
cycle for
sure.
your consideration, without a
That
doubt.
makes sense. Thank you.
And then there were a couple of what we're calling emerging issues, that as we are kind of putting together the program of projects, and this isn't necessarily related to scoring, but as I mentioned, there were 3 direct emission reduction projects from local communities. One for EV bus, another for EV vehicle and EV charging, and another for EV charging. The EV charging did have a Buy America waiver that was issued by the previous administration. That has been removed because it was just an executive order. And so that is something I kind of wanted to get your input on. We'll still score those projects to see how they rank. But I don't think it would be wise at this point in time, if they score well, to submit them for inclusion in the program, as they probably will not be able to move forward. I mean, I know Grant, you guys, CDOT has the electric truck program, which I know has been moving somewhat like rapidly over the last year, but that may potentially be an issue for that project that's already programmed, is getting through the Buy America. What?
That's always an issue with everything.
So is that something that you would be comfortable, I mean, like with as far as if staff doesn't recommend these projects, only based upon if they score well enough, because they're probably just going to sit there, though they would not be able to move into agreements because of the Buy America requirement. And just as to rehash, like when we're talking about these types of things, either vehicles or fueling technology, um, the companies that do these kind of things can't always like certify to Buy America because they're buying computer chips that are being sourced from who knows where, or like, I mean, like they just don't have that process in place for every little piece of the technology to meet the Buy America requirement. It's not like concrete and steel where you can point source where it came from at a moment's notice.
And then the kicker being that in the past, there was a waiver.
Don't forget to turn your mic on.
And the kicker being that in the past, there was a fairly painless waiver process for somebody to say, I can't prove this to be compliant with Buy America, so I'm gonna ask for a waiver. And under this administration, knowing that it's the same sort of idea that, and then that continued under Biden minus the one that you were speaking
Yep.
about. That it's unlikely that they'll receive a waiver or even get it in front of the folks that would look at that.
Correct. We recently, there was an older project that had been sitting in deferral. It was IHB's switcher locomotive retrofit project. They finally have like basically said, we're not interested in moving forward with this project because they weren't able to put the agreements forward because of Buy America requirements. So that project is the sponsor of that project has finally said, we're done. We're not going to do this anymore. And I feel like if we program these types of projects with no end in sight to the Buy America requirement, that they would just be sitting there. And it would be not good for us as programming federal funds that we want to get obligated, but also projects have this hope that they're going to be able to move forward. And it would be giving them false hope.
My understanding, Doug, is that the Buy America, those waivers have always been few and far between, right?
Yeah.
It is generally not the norm on federally funded projects to be exempt from the Buy America Act. So my inkling is that it would be appropriate action for this committee to take to not approve projects for funding that are currently not federally eligible, while understanding there's a constellation of things that are moving and it's a dynamic environment. Buy America has, by and large, always been a requirement.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, even as Chris mentioned, the last 4 years of the previous administration, we thought maybe they would put something back in place. Like there was a system in place for dealing with Buy America waiver requests. That never happened. So even over the last 4 years, it wasn't good and things have built up. So
Yeah, I think rail, it's harder. And then, like you said, the electric vehicle charging. But for typical roadway construction, it's simpler to do.
right.
Yeah.
And on the transit side of things, they have a process in place because vehicle procurement is a normal everyday thing that they have to do. So when we're looking at vehicle tech and fuel technology, like they have a process already in place. That could change. I don't know. And then last I wanted to talk about the carbon reduction program. So this was created by IIJA. And in our last program, we programmed funding between 2022 and basically 2028. The IIJA ended or will end at the end of 2026. So we already have an issue, a potential issue, I think, if carbon reduction program is not renewed as part of the next bill, these funds could just disappear from as something that's a thing. And there's about 75 million currently in the out years for carbon reduction. And I should say out years outside of IIJA. So staff will most likely not submit any proposed funding for the using carbon reduction funds for projects in this application cycle. And that's because we're already outside of the existing bill. And we're not sure of the status of the program. And we've always kind of taken a viewpoint of like, if funding were able to disappear from like, say, like the CMAQ program not go on, we would work with sponsors to try to find alternative funding. We'd rather not put ourselves in a position where we have to, like, right now we're looking at coming up with 75 million from some other source to make those projects whole. If we program 2 more years of funding, that's another $40 million that we would have to find. So
That seems prudent to me.
what?
That seems prudent to me.
Yeah,
That-
I didn't think anybody would object to that, like, but we also don't want any surprises and you're like, come back and I'm not, don't have any carbon in the proposed program and you're like, well, why are you doing this? So having this conversation in advance of our April meeting.
Same with the Buy America thing. I agree
Okay.
with that, your recommendation on that.
All right, well, that's all I have on the program. Are there any other questions or, yeah, Mark?
Couple questions, might need to go back a few slides to the CMAQ sort of summary quantities there. You had 6 transit project applications and then 3 Buy America or something, is that right?
So
One more after this, I think. Transit Service Board. No. The other way. Yeah, there we go. Access to Transit 3, Transit Facility Improvement 3, okay.
yeah, so, and that includes RTA's application
Yeah.
that has 5 projects
Right.
built
That's
into
why
it,
I'm trying
but
to just-
the application itself, we just counted as
The other
one.
2 access to transit, is that the Glen Ellen and then is that a considered
And,
access?
CDOT's, the Pedway project.
Oh, okay. Okay. And the Glen Ellen.
I believe so, yes.
And then a question about the Van Buren Street Station project. It's a very large project, but it doesn't have anything in the years of 28, so it's all out year. How is that getting treated? What is that?
I'd have to go and take a look at that one.
Like 150 million, but it was all in out years, so I don't know, is that being counted in these statistics or not? Not quite, because it's.
Yeah, I think it's probably, if they requested the funding, it's included in these numbers. But if it wasn't, I would just, there's enough projects where I don't know them intimately on
Yeah,
each
I
one.
just curious what, it's all in the out year, so I'm wondering if it's even, would you even recommend a project that's all in the out years?
Well, it depends, like if they're doing like engineering work to begin with, like, and we've done this with the city with some of their, like State and Lake, we did that with, and I believe even Washington, Wabash, where funded engineering with the construction not programmed at that time, and then they came back once engineering was a little bit further along. Yeah. Oftentimes those big station projects can, I mean, even what we consider phase 2 engineering portion can take some time.
All right, I'm not seeing that, but I'll let you.
Okay,
I'll-
I can take a closer look and get back to you on that one. I don't remember that one extremely well. Yep. Anything else? All right, well, we'll be reaching out and getting in touch once we have the kind of the evaluation done and next proposed program for your consideration in April. Moving along sorry. to 7.0 other business. Is there any other business that committee members wish to bring forward today? All right, hearing none. Moving on to 8.0, public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to make a public comment? If someone's online, if you could raise your hand and wait for staff to identify you. Is there anybody online who wishes to make a comment? John, do we have anything? Okay. All right, 9.0, next meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 3rd. And with that, there's no other business before the committee today. I would take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Thank you. Second,
Second,
thank you.
Kelly's.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.